I got off work around 4 a.m. and headed back to the Wild Wild West motel, expecting my boyfriend, Jason, to be fast asleep. I walked into chaos. Music blaring, empty beer cans scattered on tables, strangers in the corners of our rooms, fidgeting with nothing. And then there was Jason. He had that familiar look of intensity locked on his face, highly focusing in on me. He had no remorse. I felt sick. I was shaking on the inside and paralyzed on the outside. Then Jason approached me, grabbed my hand, and said, "I have a surprise for you." He led me to the bathroom, passing strangers strewn across the floors. One person passed out on my bed. They looked dirty. They looked like people I'd only seen on TV or in movies. It was all so surreal to me. I wasn't raised this way. I was raised well with cleanliness and routine. My mom worked hard in an upper-class neighborhood of Chino Hills, Southern California, a neighborhood she could not afford. She cleaned houses and drove buses, went to school, raised me by herself, and this is what I've made of myself? My eyes began to well with tears. How did I get here? In the bathroom, my eyes immediately focused on the bright blue circles of OxyContin in the palm of Jason's hand. I'm excited. How did I become this? There was a tug of war inside me between the addict I've become and who I truly am. My chest began to tighten and adrenaline rushed through my body. Fuck it. I popped all 4 pills at once. Everything else disappeared. The disappointment and shame disappeared, and I was flooded with a synthetic high. 3 months ago, Jason had the brilliant idea of running off to Vegas to start a new life. I had a terrible and secret addiction to Oxy, an addiction that started with Vicodin after having my tonsils removed 3 years earlier. He was addicted to crystal meth, an addiction he acquired through a long life of partying. He was not the kind of guy I was typically attracted to, and I was not his typical girl. I was young and still in college. I worked as an EMT, and I was going to be a physician's assistant. I lived on my own and took care of myself. I was what most people would call a goody-goody. He lived in the apartment upstairs from me. He had roommates, a Mustang. His arms and neck were covered in tattoos, and he was 10 years older than me. It was one night at the Boiler Room, a bar with a dance floor in Redlands, when I stopped in my tracks when I saw Jason on the dance floor. I guess you could say that's when I started looking at Jason as more than just my tweaker neighbor upstairs. Why we chose Vegas, I don't know. But we arrived on a Greyhound bus with our dogs, Easy and Sammy, and money to last us for 2 days. It was enough money to rent a room for a couple of nights, feed our dogs, and feed ourselves. That was it. But we were starting fresh, and good things were going to happen. On day 1, we trolled the streets of Vegas looking for jobs. He promised he was going to contribute financially this time around. He said now that he was clean, he was able to pull his weight. I didn't believe him, but what was I going to do? I was just as sick as he was. Surprisingly, we both got jobs that day. He was hired to do sales at a gym, and I was hired as a cocktail waitress at an old bar called Champagne's Cafe off the Strip. It was the kind of bar where you could feel its dark history. It's like you knew mob hits were made over cocktails in the big brown leather booths. Big brown leather booths filled with washed-up gamblers, ex-prostitutes, down on their luck locals, and a few hipsters looking for a new experience. The air was thick with hard liquor and cigarettes, the sound of video poker, a lot of broken dreams. But to me, it was full of hope. For me, it was a new beginning. For me, it was my salvation. The next day, Jason got up bright and early to go to his sales job. It was a side of him I hadn't seen before. I was used to seeing him awake all day and all night, organizing his pathetic collection of football cards he stole from Walmart, then crashing hard from a week-long run, sleeping for 3 days straight, waking up occasionally to make empty promises that this was the last time, promising that when he came out of this detox, he was going to get help, get a job, and participate in life. I never thought I'd actually see the day when he'd wake up, shower, put on slacks and his uniform shirt, and head to work. He looked responsible, like he was following through with his word, and that made me feel confidence in him for the first time in our relationship. The shitty part is, Jason never did return to his job, not even to pick up his paycheck for the one day he worked. I held on to waitressing by a thread. Between the days I called in sick, too sick with withdrawals to climb out of bed, to the orders I messed up and the drinks I spilled from becoming too high to function, it still baffles me that they kept me around. The tips I made went to feed our addictions. We never ate. I shrank to a corpse. I paid for our dingy motel room for as long as I could. When the money ran out, Jason welcomed homelessness with open arms. He saw it as a way out, the same way he saw Vegas as a way out. He planned to go to the homeless shelter and sleep on a cot, eat at their soup kitchen, utilize their good deeds, their charity, and their resources to his benefit. But my pride, what little I had left, wouldn't allow it. The first night, we slept by a dumpster. We curled up on the hard concrete floor. I wrapped my dog's leashes around my wrists and I held them close to me. They were shaking with fear and I held back tears of guilt as I kissed them and promised them they'd be safe. Soon after, I passed out from exhaustion. The withdrawals were kicking in and I could feel my body going into shock from not having the oxy it had become so dependent upon. My bones ached, my eyes and nose were running, my legs were kicking uncontrollably, and I was sweating profusely while shivering. Instinctually, I'd wake up every half hour to make sure my dogs were safe, and I'd pass out again. The next day, I bathed in a public restroom. I washed my hair and put on some makeup, doing what I could to look like myself. I carried Easy and Sammy under my arms and walked up the strip to a casino called Slots of Fun to buy hot dogs for $1. I bought Jason and each of my dogs a hot dog with what little money I had. I didn't eat as I'm a vegetarian. We did this for the next few days, and the woman who sold us the hot dogs could tell we were struggling. Her name was Cindy, and she was more concerned about our dogs than she was with us. Every day she approached us and offered to take our dogs in and give them a home. "Our time's hard," she'd say. "I want you to know I can take them off your hands." I scowled at her. "We're fine," I'd say, softening my gaze as I turned and looked at their faces, vowing never to give them up. The next couple of days were a blur as the withdrawal from the oxy took full effect. We wandered around the strip. I'd make sure to walk several steps ahead of Jason because by this time he looked and smelled like he'd been living on the streets for much longer than he actually had. His constant look of defeat sickened and embarrassed me. He accepted our situation wholly, and that enraged me. By the third day, I was defeated. I didn't know when this nightmare was going to end, but I did know what these dogs were enduring wasn't fair. As much as I wanted them with me, they deserved a safe and stable home, and I couldn't give that to them. I forced myself to walk back to Slots of Fun, both dogs cradled in my arms with tears in my eyes. Cindy wasn't there and I panicked. I thought I'd lost my chance. I bought them their hot dogs and asked if Cindy would be in today. The manager told me yes at 3 p.m. I fed them their last meal they'd ever have with me and walked back to the dumpsters and Jason. I told him, "You're taking Easy and Sammy and you're giving them to her." He fought with me, telling me I'm weak for giving them up and that he wouldn't give them away, but I forced him. This time, he was finally going to take responsibility. When 3 p.m. rolled around, I held on to them so tight, kissing each of them on the tops of their little noses, sobbing and apologizing. I handed them to Jason. "Carry them all the way. The ground is too hot for their paws." I couldn't watch as he walked away. The next 2 days, we were tired, hungry, and sad. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up panicked with a sinking feeling, thinking I had lost them, then realizing they had gone to a new home. We were walking in the parking lot behind the Frontier Hotel and Casino when out of nowhere, Jason began yelling at me. "This is your entire fault," he shouted. "You're weak. You gave up on them." He stormed off. I didn't care. I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't responsible for this grown, dilapidated human for this brief moment in time, and that made me feel hopeful. I watched as he turned the corner onto the strip. I never did see Jason again. Within the next hour, I was wandering across the street and was hit by a car. Well, more like a car rolled into me, but when a 6,000-pound SUV rolls into your 95-pound body, it'll knock you over. As I sat in the middle of the street, trying to comprehend what had just happened, a man approached me and extended a hand. He was older, maybe 50 or so, and he was kind. He helped me up, picked up my suitcase, and escorted me out of the street. I have no idea what happened to the guy who hit me with his car. I was in such a fog that I didn't care. At the kind man's car, he asked me if I had a home. Without hesitation and completely against my character, I spilled my guts to him. He listened intently as we took a seat on the curb behind his car. He nodded kindly, asked few questions, and as I wrapped up my story, he looked down at the ground, hands resting between his legs. He said nothing. After what felt like an eternity, in his thick Brooklyn accent, he said, "I think that man who just hit you with his car saved your life." He handed me his cell phone and said, "Call home." And so I did. I called home. Thank you.
That was Brandy DeBatte.